strike before the enemy could reorganize and force the war onto German soil. But as autumn leaves began to turn and the days grew shorter, the nature of the war was about to change dramatically. Reaching the German border was not merely a symbolic milestone. It was a paramount strategic objective. For the Allies, crossing into Germany meant taking the war directly to the enemy's homeland, a psychological blow from which the Nazi regime might never recover. For Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower, it was the logical and necessary next step to crush Germany's industrial capacity and its will to fight the industrial heartland of the Ruhr Valley. The Saar Basin's coal fields, these were the engines of the German war machine, and they lay just beyond the frontier. Taking them would cripple Hitler's ability to produce tanks, aircraft, and ammunition. The push to the border became a race against time, a race to end the war before Germany could reconstitute its battered forces, and before the onset of a bitter European winter. As the Allied spearheads approached the German frontier, however, the exhilarating advance ground to a shuddering halt. Before them loomed a formidable and mythologized obstacle and paranoia. The line was a bristling network of more than 18,000 bunkers, pillboxes, and observation posts, interconnected by a web of trenches and tunnels. The most iconic and visually intimidating feature was the Dragon's Teeth, or Hooker-Hinderness's impassable rows of sharp, reinforced concrete pyramids designed to shred the tracks of Allied tanks and channel them into pre-registered killing zones. This was Hitler's shield, a fortress designed to bleed any invading army white. The soldiers who had so recently been cheered as liberators now faced the cold, hard reality of siege warfare. The psychological impact of the Siegfried Line was as potent as its physical structure. For the foreign field, this was the sacred soil of the fatherland. They were no longer occupiers but defenders, and their determination was born of desperation. Propaganda had painted the West Wall as an impenetrable fortress, and for these men, it was the last bastion against an enemy they had been told would destroy their homes and families. They fought with a ferocity that stunned the battle-hardened Allied troops. Every pillbox had to be taken at bayonet point, every trench cleared with grenades and flamethrowers. The fighting was intimate, brutal, and unforgiving, a grim struggle for inches of German earth. Compounding the ferocity of the German defense was a crisis that threatened to stop the Allied armies in their tracks: logistics. The rapid advance across France had stretched supply lines to their breaking point. West Wall. Entire sections of the line were overrun, and American and British troops finally stood on German soil, not as raiders, but as an occupying force. The impenetrable shield had been breached. This hard-won victory, however, came at a tremendous cost and had dangerously depleted Allied frontline strength. The long, arduous fight had created a sense of exhausted confidence, a belief that the German army was on its last legs. But in the snow-draped forests of the Ardennes, Hitler was quietly gathering the last of his panzer divisions. The breaking of the Siegfried Line was not the end of the struggle, but the prelude to Germany's final, desperate gamble, a massive, surprise counteroffensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The war was far from over. Under the cloak of a bitter pre-dawn darkness, Hitler unleashes his final, desperate gamble in the West. More than 200,000 German soldiers and nearly 1,000 tanks smash into the thinly held American lines, a ghost army emerging from the snow-shrouded pines. For the Allied soldiers, many of them green troops anticipating a quiet Christmas, the world dissolves into chaos. The thunder of the initial artillery barrage is not just a deafening announcement that the war, which seemed all but won, is about to enter its most brutal and uncertain phase. The shock is absolute. The front line, stretched precariously thin over 85 miles, begins to fracture and then disintegrate under the sheer weight of the German onslaught. The weather itself becomes a German ally, a malevolent force blanketing the battlefield. A relentless, Arctic cold descends upon the Ardennes, with temperatures and inflicting frostbite as severe as any shrapnel wound. The endless white of the snow-covered forest becomes a disorienting maze, a place where friend and foe are indistinguishable until the last, fatal moment. This is not just a battle. It is a primal struggle for survival against both a determined enemy and a merciless winter. The German objective is as ambitious as it is audacious. Codenamed *Wacht am Rhein *Squatch on the Rhine, the offensive aims to punch through the Allied lines, cross the Meuse River, and drive a wedge between the British and American armies. The ultimate prize is the vital port of Antwerp, the logistical heart of the Allied supply chain. By capturing it, Hitler believes he can not only cripple the Allied war machine, but also force the Western desperation, a roll of the dice by a regime facing certain defeat. But it is executed with terrifying speed and precision. 3 German armies, the 6th Panzer, 5th Panzer, and the 7th Army form the spearhead, designed to shatter the American front before any cohesive response can be mounted. The offensive is meant to be a blitzkrieg reborn, a final, stunning echo of the triumphs of 1940. In the face of this overwhelming assault, the American lines bend, and in some places, they break completely. The 106th Infantry Division, a green unit with barely any combat experience, is positioned in the most exposed sector of the front, the Schnee-Eifel. They are swiftly encircled by 2 prongs of the German advance. Confused, cut off from command, and pounded by and retreat, pockets of extraordinary resistance begin to form. At the crucial crossroads town of Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division rushed into the breach, finds itself completely surrounded. When the German commander demands their surrender, the American acting commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, delivers a one-word reply that will echo through history: nuts. It is an act of pure defiance, a refusal to yield, and artillerymen stand their ground at vital crossroads and bridges, fighting desperate, heroic delaying actions. They buy precious time with their lives, slowing the German timetable and throwing the enemy's meticulous plan into disarray. The most potent and feared element of the German attack is its armored spearhead, particularly the notorious Kampfrepiper, a battle group from the 1st SS Panzer Division, commanded by the ruthless Joachim Peiper. This powerful force of King Tiger is our army, racing for the Meuse bridges before the Allies can react. Kampfrepiper carves a bloody path through the American lines, its advance marked by a trail of destroyed vehicles and horrific atrocities, most infamously the Malmedy Massacre, where over 80 unarmed American prisoners of war were murdered in cold blood. Piper's panzers seem unstoppable, a steel behemoth chewing up the landscape. They brush aside initial resistance, their progress measured not in miles, but in hours. The race to the river had begun, and the Germans were determined to make the Allies pay for every foot of ground in blood. Along the western bank of the Rhine, the sounds of demolition echoed like a death knell for the Third Reich. Massive explosions sent tons of steel and concrete crashing into the cold, dark waters below. German engineers, often working under direct Allied fire, carried out stretched for hundreds of miles. The Allied High Command had anticipated this, making extensive plans for a massive, deliberate, and costly amphibious assault codenamed Operation Plunder, scheduled for late March. They prepared fleets of landing craft, amphibious vehicles, and airborne divisions. One of the final bloody acts of the war. But war is a theater of the unexpected, and history was about to pivot on a single, improbable stroke of luck. On March 7, 1945, elements of the U.S. 9th Armored Division, under the command of General mop up German stragglers on the West Bank, as Lieutenant Karl Timmerman's infantry company reached a hill overlooking the river. They stared in disbelief. There, standing intact against the sky, German demolition charges had been set, but a combination of faulty wiring, damaged fuses, and the sheer courage of the American soldiers prevented its complete destruction. As the first major explosion rocked the bridge, it shuddered and buckled but did not machine gun and sniper fire. They cut wires, threw unexploded charges into the river, and fought a desperate close-quarters battle to secure the eastern bank. The message that electrified the Allied world: "We have a bridge." The unexpected capture of the Ludendorff Bridge was, as General Eisenhower would later describe it, worth its weight in gold. The news sent shockwaves through both Allied and German command. While engineers frantically worked to reinforce the damaged structure, a torrent of American men and materiel began to pour across. Tanks, artillery, and thousands of infantrymen flooded onto the east. Germans, caught completely off guard, responded with frantic and ferocious counterattacks. elite SS units, remnants of panzer divisions, and even Hitler Youth were hurled against the American positions. The Luftwaffe soldiers leaderless and trapped. With the Rhine now behind them, the Allied armies surged forward into the German heartland in a massive, sweeping advance. In the north, Montgomery's 21st Army Group executed Operation Plunder, a massive, well-coordinated assault that overwhelmed the remaining German defenders. In the center, the U.S. 1st and 9th Armies executed a gigantic pincer movement, encircling and trapping over 300,000 German troops of Army Group B in the Ruhr Pocket, the largest single surrender on the Western Front. To the south, Patton's 3rd Army raced eastward, covering ground at a breathtaking pace, while the U.S. 7th Army advanced through Bavaria. The once feared Wehrmacht dissolved into a collection of isolated, retreating units. Cities fell one after another: Frankfurt, Kassel, Nuremberg. For the German people, the war had come home with terrifying speed, as Allied columns rolled through towns and villages that had been untouched by conflict just weeks before. The final act of the war in Europe was now at hand, as American and British forces pushed deeper from the west. The Red Army was closing in on Berlin from the east, unleashing a final, apocalyptic storm of steel and fire upon the capital of the Reich. The Allied breakthrough across the Rhine had shattered the last vestiges of organized German resistance in the West, accelerating the final victory and sealing the fate of Hitler's 1,000-year Reich. The end was no longer a matter of if, but when. The battle for Germany was over. All that remained was the battle for Berlin, and the final, unconditional surrender that would bring the most destructive conflict in human history to its European close.